What an alien veteran saw in human wars will send shivers down your spine, #. Part 1. The assignment commander Vextel of the Galactic Military Observatory Corps had witnessed warfare across 47 star systems. The veteran's Enteron officer prided himself on documenting combat with clinical precision, having observed the elegant plasma duels of the Therians and the calculated siege tactics of the crystalline Vorthok. Today's briefing felt routine. "Commander, you're assigned to observe Terran combat operations in the Outer Rim conflicts," announced General Korth, sliding a datapad across the metal table. "The humans have requested neutral observation of their military capabilities." Astel S. Four eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of mild amusement among his species. Humans. The bipedal mammals who only achieved faster-than-light travel 3 decades ago. What could they possibly demonstrate that we haven't cataloged from more advanced species? "That's what we're sending you to find out," Korth replied. "You'll embed with their 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit under Captain Li Wu-jin. Standard observation protocols apply." As Vextel reviewed the files, he noted humanity's brief military history with dismissive clicks of his mandibles. Their weapons were kinetic-based, primitive compared to energy weapons used by established galactic powers. Their armor looked bulky and inefficient. Their ships appeared to be held together with what humans called duct tape and prayers. "This should be enlightening," Vextel muttered, already composing his preliminary report in his mind. He expected to document another species' predictable adherence to the Galactic Convention of Warfare Net. Orderly, civilized combat with minimal casualties and clear victory conditions. He had no idea what he was about to witness. ##. Part 2. First Blood, the human transport ship Indomitable. Shuddered as it approached the contested asteroid mining station, designated Sierra 7, Vextel steadied himself against a bulkhead. Noting the vessel's apparent structural instability with professional disapproval. "First time on a human bucket of bolts?" asked Captain Li Wu-jin, checking his rifle with casual efficiency. The human commander appeared remarkably calm for someone heading into combat aboard what Vextel considered a flying death trap. "I have observed pre-combat preparations among 63 different species," Vextel replied stiffly. "Your vessel seems inadequate for military operations." Lee's laugh surprised the alien observer. "She's held together with spite and good intentions, but she'll get us there." He turned to address his Marines. "Listen up. Intel says Sierra 7 has approximately 200 hegemony defenders using standard energy barriers and pulse weapons. We're going in with kinetic rounds and pure stubbornness." Vextel's translator struggled with several human colloquialisms, but the tactical situation seemed clear enough. The humans were outnumbered and outgunned, a scenario that, according to galactic military doctrine, should result in immediate withdrawal or negotiated surrender. Instead, Private Kim Taeyang whooped with enthusiasm. "Sounds like a fair fight." "Fair fight?" Vextel's confusion was genuine. "You appear to be at a significant disadvantage." Sergeant Park Manesio grinned, revealing teeth that seemed far too sharp for an herbivorous species. "Observer, you're about to learn something about humans? I don't like fair fights." The assault began with what Vextel initially dismissed as tactical incompetence. Instead of following standard galactic siege protocols, establishing perimeter positions, conducting systematic bombardment, waiting for defensive collapse, the humans simply charged directly at the heavily fortified asteroid base. What happened next defied every military principle Vextel had ever observed. Private Song. Hyun's armor took 3 direct hits from energy weapons that should have liquefied her internal organs. Instead of falling, she used her damaged chest plate as an improvised shield while continuing to advance, returning fire with a weapon that was literally held together with metallic tape. "Song's down to backup systems," reported Corporal Choi. Jay woke over the cum, as if this were a minor inconvenience rather than a life-threatening equipment failure. "I'm fine," Song replied, her voice strained but determined. "Just a little crispy around the edges." Vextel watched in growing horror and fascination as the humans adapted to catastrophic equipment failures in real time. When Lance Corporal Yoon Dong-hook's rifle jammed during a firefight, he didn't retreat to safety for repairs. Instead, he used the weapon as a club while drawing a secondary sidearm. continuing his assault without missing a beat, the hegemony. Defenders accustomed to opponents who followed rational military doctrine found themselves completely unprepared for humans, who treated severe injuries and equipment failures as minor obstacles rather than mission-ending catastrophes. By the time the dust settled, Sierra 7 had fallen in less than 4 hours, a siege that should have taken days, according to galactic military projections. As medics treated the wounded, Vextal approached Captain Lee, who was calmly field-stripping his weapon despite a plasma burn across his left shoulder. "Captain, your casualties were... extensive. By galactic standards, this would be considered a Pyrrhic victory at best." Lee looked up, genuinely puzzled. "Gah, observer, we accomplished our objective with acceptable losses. Everyone who went in is coming back alive. In human terms, this was a textbook operation." Vextal's recording equipment captured every word, but his mind struggled to process what he'd witnessed. These humans fought as if death was merely an inconvenience rather than an absolute termination of existence. He was beginning to suspect that his report would be unlike any he had ever written. Part 3, The Impossible Rescue, 3 days after. Sierra 7, Vextal thought he understood human military methodology. They were reckless, improvised constantly, and treated equipment failures as routine challenges rather than critical problems. While unconventional, their approach seemed to work within acceptable parameters of galactic military science. Then came the incident at Omega Station. "Observer, you might want to strap in for this one," Captain Lee said grimly, as the Indomitable approached the massive space platform. Intelligence reports indicated that a routine patrol sergeant, Park Minesco, and 5 Marines had been captured during a reconnaissance mission gone wrong. Standard galactic protocol was clear. Captured personnel were considered acceptable losses. Military assets were not risked for individual recovery operations, especially when the enemy held a strategically superior position. Vextal expected Lee to file the appropriate casualty reports, move on to the next objective. Instead, the human captain was planning an assault on a fortified station with a garrison of over 800 hegemony soldiers. Captain Vextal's translator conveyed his incredulity perfectly. "Your tactical analysis must be flawed. You're proposing to risk an entire unit to recover 6 individuals from an impregnable position. This violates every principle of military efficiency." Observer Lee replied, checking his sidearm with steady hands. "You're about to learn something important about humans. We don't leave our people behind. Ever." The rescue mission began with what Vextal could only describe as controlled insanity. Private Kim Tae-young volunteered to approach Omega Station's main docking bay in a damaged shuttle, deliberately drawing defensive fire while the rest of the unit infiltrated through what humans optimistically called alternative entry points, meaning they blew holes in the station's hull and entered through the resulting breaches. "Tae-young, your shuttle is falling apart," reported Corporal Choi Jae-wook, as the young Marine's craft took devastating hits from the station's defense grid. "Still flying? Still drawing fire?" Tae-young replied cheerfully, even as his cockpit, filled with smoke, "Just point me at something expensive." Vextal watched in mounting disbelief as the human pilot deliberately crashed his shuttle into Omega Station's primary power relay, sacrificing his escape route to create a temporary power outage that would benefit his squad mates. Meanwhile, Lance Corporal Yoon Dong-hook and Private Song Ha-yoon were engaging in what they called aggressive demolition systematically, destroying sections of the station to create diversions while the main rescue team located their captured comrades. "Observer," Song reported over the comm while hanging upside down in a ventilation shaft. "Humans have a saying, if it's stupid, but it works, it's not stupid. Your current position appears both stupid and non-functional," Vextal replied, his translator struggling with human idioms. "Give me 30 seconds, Song said, and promptly detonated an improvised explosive that opened a direct route to the detention level. "What?" Vextal witnessed next would haunt his dreams for cycles to come. The rescue team found Sergeant Park and his Marines in a heavily guarded detention block surrounded by 60 hegemony soldiers and protected by energy barriers that should have made extraction impossible. The humans solution was characteristically insane. They used themselves as living shields. Corporal Choi positioned himself directly in front of the detention cell, absorbing energy blasts meant for the prisoners, while Private Song provided covering fire from an impossible angle. Lance Corporal Yoon literally threw himself on top of a plasma grenade to protect his squad mates, his armor absorbing an explosion that should have vaporized him. Yoon's armor is completely fried, reported the squad medic, but he's still mobile. I'm fine, Yoon gasped, his voice barely audible. Through his damaged cum system, just a little toasted. Against all tactical logic, the rescue succeeded. All 12 humans made it back to the Indomitable alive, though several would require extensive medical treatment as the ship limped away from Omega Station. Istall approached Captain Lee in the medical bay where the human commander was receiving treatment for severe plasma burns. Captain, your unit sustained casualties that would be considered unacceptable by any galactic military standard. The strategic value of 6 individuals cannot justify risking an entire squad. Lee looked at the alien observer with eyes that seemed older than his years. Observer, you're thinking about this wrong. Those weren't just 6 individuals, they were our people, in human military culture. Abandoning your brothers and sisters in arms isn't just tactically unacceptable, it's morally impossible. But the casualties will heal, Lee interrupted. The knowledge that we never abandon our own, that makes us stronger. Every human who serves knows that their comrades will move heaven and earth to bring them home. That knowledge makes us fight harder, take greater risks, and accomplish impossible missions. Vexdal's recording equipment captured every word, but his understanding of human warfare was beginning to shift in ways that his military training had never prepared him for. These humans didn't fight wars, they fought for each other. Part 4. Psychological warfare. 2 weeks after the Omega Station rescue, Vexdal believed he had begun to understand human military psychology. They prioritized individual lives over strategic efficiency, improvised constantly, and maintained morale through what appeared to be collective insanity, disguised as esprit de corps. Then the hegemony made a critical error. They tried to break human spirits through psychological warfare. The enemy's strategy seemed sound by galactic standards. They broadcast continuous propaganda, highlighting human casualties, emphasized the futility of human resistance against superior technology, and offered generous surrender terms that would allow human forces to withdraw with honor intact. Most species would have begun serious negotiations within hours. Instead, the humans did something that chilled Vexdal to his core. They laughed. Observer, Captain Lee said, reviewing the latest hegemony surrender offer with obvious amusement. You're about to witness something that makes other species very uncomfortable. When humans are faced with overwhelming odds and psychological pressure, we don't break, we get creative. The first sign of trouble came when Private Kim Tae-zong volunteered for a special reconnaissance mission that involved approaching hegemony positions alone, in broad daylight, carrying only a sidearm, and what humans called a really bad attitude. This is tactical suicide, Vexdal protested as he watched Taeyang walk directly toward enemy lines. He'll be captured or killed within minutes. Maybe Sergeant Park Manesio replied with a grin that showed too many teeth. Or maybe the enemy is about to learn why humans have a reputation for being completely unpredictable. What happened next defied every principle of military psychology that Vexdal had studied. Taejong approached the hegemony defensive perimeter, sat down in full view of enemy soldiers, and calmly began eating his field rations while occasionally waving at the confused defenders. When hegemony troops demanded his surrender over loudspeakers, he responded by offering to share his meal. Is he... negotiating? Vexdal asked, his translator struggling with the surreal situation. Nope, Park replied, is proving a point. The point became clear when additional hegemony forces were diverted to deal with the psychological anomaly of a single human who appeared completely unconcerned by overwhelming enemy presence. While the enemy focused on Taeyong's bizarre behavior, Corporal Choi Jae-wook and Private Song Ha-yoon infiltrated the distracted defensive positions from behind. But the real psychological warfare had only just begun. Over the following days, the humans employed tactics that seemed designed specifically to unnerve their opponents. Lance Corporal Yundong Hook would approach enemy positions at night and leave small gifts, human food, handwritten notes and broken hegemony script, sometimes just drawings of happy faces. "What is your strategic objective?" Vextall demanded. After observing this pattern for several cycles, making them think, Park explained. Most species fight according to predictable patterns. Humans, we're unpredictable enough that our enemies start second-guessing everything. The campaign reached its psychological climax when Captain Lee implemented what he called Operation Friendly Neighbor. Instead of launching conventional attacks, human forces began broadcasting music, sharing cooking recipes over open communication channels, and occasionally calling enemy positions to ask for directions to various landmarks. "This is not military strategy," Vextall protested. "This is elaborate performance art." "Same thing from a certain point of view," Lee replied. "Observer, we're not trying to defeat the enemy through superior firepower, we're trying to defeat them by making them so confused and demoralized that they make tactical errors." The strategy worked with terrifying effectiveness. Hegemony forces, accustomed to rational opponents who followed predictable military doctrine, found themselves completely unable to anticipate human actions. Enemy commanders wasted resources preparing for conventional assaults that never came, while their troops became increasingly paranoid about humans, who seemed to treat warfare as a combination of military operation and social experiment. The breaking point came when Private Song Hyun, during a routine patrol, encountered a hegemony soldier who had become separated from his unit. Instead of engaging in combat, she offered him directions back to enemy lines, a field medical kit for a minor injury, and her personal rations. "Why?" the confused enemy soldier asked in broken Standard Galactic. "Because you look hungry, Song," replied in equally broken hegemony dialect, "and my mom taught me to be polite to strangers." The incident was recorded by both sides and spread through hegemony communication networks within hours. Enemy forces began reporting that humans were either completely insane or operating according to psychological principles too advanced for conventional military analysis. "Observer," Captain Lee said that evening, "you're witnessing humanity's greatest military asset. We don't just fight wars, we make our enemies question everything they think they know about conflict." As Vexto reviewed his notes, he realized that human psychological warfare wasn't based on fear or intimidation like most species. Instead, it was based on genuine unpredictability, combined with acts of inexplicable kindness that left enemies unable to develop effective countermeasures. The humans had weaponized their own humanity. Part 5. The Report That Changed Everything 6. Months after beginning his observation assignment, Commander Vextall sat in his quarters aboard the Indomitable, staring at a datapad that contained the most disturbing military analysis he had ever written. The hegemony forces had withdrawn from the Outer Rim sectors 3 weeks earlier, citing unacceptable psychological warfare conditions in enemy forces that operate outside conventional military parameters. It was the first time in galactic history that a technologically superior force had retreated from a human opponent due to what their commanders described as existential tactical confusion. Captain Li Wujin knocked on Vextall's door, carrying 2 cups of what humans called kafia, stimulant beverage that the alien observer had learned to appreciate despite its bitter taste. "Almost finished with your report?" Lee asked, settling into a chair that creaked under his weight. "Captain, I have observed 64 different species engage in military operations across 47 star systems. Have documented every major form of warfare known to galactic civilization. Plasma campaigns, kinetic bombardments, orbital sieges, biological warfare, economic conflicts, and technological suppression campaigns." He paused, manipulating the datapad with hands that trembled slightly. "In all of my experience, I have never encountered a species that fights the way humans fight." "How do we fight?" Lee asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer would be complicated. "Other species fight for territory, resources, political advantage, or survival," Vextall explained. These are rational motivations that produce predictable tactical decisions. Military commands can analyze enemy objectives, anticipate their strategies, and develop effective countermeasures. He stood and walked to the viewport, staring out at the stars that seemed somehow different after his months with human forces. Humans fight for each other. You treat warfare not as a political tool or strategic necessity, but as a personal obligation to the individuals who serve beside you. This creates tactical unpredictability that renders conventional military analysis useless. Lee sipped his coffee thoughtfully. Is that good or bad, from a galactic perspective? Terrifying, Vextel replied honestly. When Private Song Hao-woon gave medical supplies to an enemy soldier, she wasn't following any military doctrine I could identify. When Lance Corporal Yoon Dong-hyuk threw himself on a plasma grenade to protect his squad mates, he violated every survival instinct that evolution should have programmed into his species. The alien observer turned from the viewport to face the human captain. Your species doesn't fight wars, Captain. You fight for the concept that individual lives matter more than strategic objectives. This makes you simultaneously the most inefficient and most effective military force I have ever studied. So, inefficient because you take casualties and risks that other species would consider unacceptable? Effective because your willingness to die for each other makes you nearly impossible to defeat through conventional means. Vextal returned to his datapad, reviewing the final sections of his report. I am recommending that the galactic military observatory corps classify human warfare as a separate category requiring specialized study. Traditional military analysis is inadequate for understanding forces that prioritize individual loyalty over strategic efficiency. What will you call this new category? Lee asked. Rational effectiveness, Vextal replied. Human military forces achieve victory conditions through methods that should not work according to established military science, but succeed because enemy forces cannot develop countermeasures for tactics based on emotional rather than strategic logic. The alien commander saved his report and prepared to transmit it to Galactic Command, knowing that his conclusions would be disputed by military analysts who had never observed human forces in actual combat. Captain, I have one final question, Vextal said. When you risk everything to save individual soldiers, when you show kindness to enemies, when you treat warfare as a personal rather than political conflict, do you do this consciously, or is it simply how humans are? Lee considered the question for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup as if it contained answers to fundamental questions about human nature. Observer, I think it's both. We choose to fight for each other because we believe individual lives matter. But we're also built this way. Humans are social creatures who form emotional bonds that override logical self-interest. He looked up at the alien commander with eyes that reflected years of combat experience. Maybe that makes us crazy by galactic standards, but it also makes us human. And in my experience, being human is the most powerful weapon we have. As Vextal transmitted his report to Galactic Command, he included a final personal note that would influence military policy for generations. Recommendation: never assume humans will act rationally in combat situations. Their greatest military strength is their willingness to embrace what other species would consider tactical insanity. Any force engaging human opponents should prepare for enemies who fight not for victory, but for each other. This makes them more dangerous than any weapons, technology, or strategic advantage. The report concluded with a single line that would be quoted in military academies across the galaxy: humans don't win wars through superior tactics or technology. They win wars by refusing to let their people fight alone. 6 months later, when Vextal was reassigned to observe Crystalline Defense Force operations in the Andromeda sector, he found himself missing the chaotic warmth of human military culture. No other species he studied ever asked about his personal welfare, shared their food without being asked, or treated a galactic military observer as anything more than a necessary bureaucratic presence. In his private log, Vextal wrote, I have learned that military effectiveness cannot be measured purely in tactical terms. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is the knowledge that someone cares whether you come home alive. The report filed by Commander Vextel became required reading at the Galactic Military Academy, and human military advisors were soon in demand across Allied forces throughout the galaxy. But more importantly, it marked the beginning of galactic recognition that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or tactics, but their fundamental refusal to treat war as anything other than a fight for the people they loved. Asterisk, asterisk. The end asterisk, asterisk Commander Vextel stood before the massive observation deck of the Galactic Military Observatory Station, his four eyes scanning the endless expanse of stars beyond the reinforced viewport. The veteran Zentoran officer had dedicated 43 years of his life to documenting warfare across the galaxy, and his reputation for clinical precision was legendary among his peers. The blue-skinned commander's elongated fingers traced patterns across his data tablet as he reviewed his latest assignments. His species, the Zentorans, were known throughout the galaxy as the most meticulous military observers. Therefore, eyes allowed them to track multiple combat scenarios simultaneously, while their advanced neural processors could analyze tactical data faster than most supercomputers. 47 star systems, Vextel murmured to himself, his voice carrying the distinctive harmonic undertones of his species. From the ice worlds of Kepler 44 to the volcanic battlefields of Proxima Centauri. See? Each conflict had been unique in its own way, yet all followed the predictable patterns established by the Galactic Convention of Warfare. The elegant plasma duels of the Etherians resembled deadly ballet performances with combatants floating through zero gravity while exchanging precisely aimed energy bursts. The crystalline Vorthok conducted their sieges like mathematical equations, calculating every variable before making their moves with clockwork precision. Even the savage Krogans, despite their reputation for brutality, followed established protocols when engaging in large-scale conflicts. Their berserker charges might seem chaotic to untrained observers, but Vextel had documented the underlying tactical patterns that governed their seemingly random violence. The morning briefing alarm echoed through the station's corridors. Its melodic chime, designed to be pleasant to the various species serving aboard the facility. Vextel gathered his observation equipment, a sophisticated array of recording devices, tactical analyzers, and translation matrices that could process over 3,000 different languages and dialects. The briefing room buzzed with quiet conversation as officers from dozens of different species reviewed their assignments. Vextel recognized his colleagues by their distinctive features: the towering Altorians with their crystalline skin, diminutive Pixari who seemed to float rather than walk, and the mechanical synthetic coalition representatives whose glowing optical sensors never blinked. General Korth entered the room with the measured stride of a career military officer. The draconian commander's scales gleamed under the artificial lighting as he approached the central briefing podium. His species had been warriors for millennia, and their natural authority made them excellent administrators for the observatory corps. "Attention, observers," Korth's voice rumbled through the chamber. Today's assignments covered 12 active conflict zones across the Outer Rim sectors. Vextel half listened as the general distributed assignments to his colleagues.
Active Proxima.
Beta Rebellion would be handled by Commander Zixera, whose species excelled at documenting guerrilla warfare. The trade disputes in the asteroid belt required someone familiar with economic conflicts, so Lieutenant Kolmesh received that posting. Commander Vextel, General Korth's voice, drew his attention back to the briefing. "You're assigned to observe Terran combat operations in the Outer Rim conflicts." The general slid a datapad across the polished metal table. The device's holographic display immediately activated, showing basic information about humanity and their recent military activities. "The humans have requested neutral observation of their military capabilities," Korth continued. "Apparently, they want galactic recognition for their tactical innovations." Vextel's four eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture that among his species indicated mild amusement mixed with skepticism. His mandibles clicked softly as he processed this information. "Humans?" he asked, his translator converting his harmonic speech into standard galactic. "The bipedal mammals who only achieved faster-than-light travel 3 decades ago." General, with respect, what could they possibly demonstrate that we haven't already cataloged from more advanced species? Several other observers chuckled at his comment. Humanity was still considered a newcomer to galactic civilization, having made first contact only 50 years earlier. Their technology seemed primitive by galactic standards, and their military experience was limited to a few minor border skirmishes with automated defense systems. That's exactly what we're sending you to find out, Korth replied, his scaled features showing the faintest hint of a smile. You'll embed with their 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit under Captain Li Wujin. Standard observation protocols applied document their tactics, analyze their equipment, and provide a comprehensive report on their military effectiveness. Vextel accepted the assignment with professional dignity, though privately he wondered if this was some form of punishment duty. Observing primitive species was typically assigned to junior officers or to those who had made significant errors in previous reports. As the briefing concluded, Vextel remained in his seat to review the files more thoroughly. The holographic display showed images of human soldiers in their bulky armor, carrying what appeared to be chemically propelled projectile weapons. Their spacecraft looked like metal boxes held together with industrial adhesives and hope. Kinetic-based weapons, he muttered, scrolling through technical specifications. Primitive compared to plasma cannons or particle beam arrays used by established galactic powers. The human armor appeared inefficient compared to the energy absorption suits worn by most advanced species. Instead of elegant force fields or adaptive metamaterials, humans relied on thick plates of metal and ceramic composites. Their helmets contained basic visual enhancement systems rather than the sophisticated neural interfaces used by more technologically advanced militaries. Human spacecraft were perhaps the most concerning aspect of their military capabilities. While other species had developed sleek vessels that could manipulate gravitational fields or phase through solid matter, human ships looked like they belonged in a scrapyard. The files mentioned something called duct tape and prayers as common maintenance procedures. Their largest warship mass is only 14,000 tons, Vextel observed, comparing the specifications to his own species' vessels. A Zentoran frigate outmasses their flagship by a factor of 3. The tactical analysis was equally unimpressive. Human military doctrine seemed to rely heavily on what they called combined arms tactics, a concept that more advanced species had abandoned centuries ago in favor of specialized combat systems. They actually used different types of weapons simultaneously, rather than optimizing for specific combat scenarios. This should be enlightening, Vextel muttered, already composing his preliminary report in his mind. He expected to document another species' predictable adherence to the Galactic Convention of Warfare Net. Orderly, civilized combat with minimal casualties and clear victory conditions. The convention had been established over 2 millennia ago to ensure that interstellar conflicts remained manageable. Participating species agreed to limit casualties, protect civilian populations, and conduct warfare according to established protocols that prevented conflicts from escalating beyond control. Most species found these restrictions perfectly reasonable. After all, warfare was supposed to achieve political objectives, not cause unnecessary destruction. The elegant combat styles favored by advanced civilizations were both effective and economical, allowing conflicts to be resolved with minimal resource expenditure, as Vextel prepared to depart for his transport to human space. He reflected on the routine nature of his assignment. In 43 years of observation duty, he had never encountered a species that operated outside established military parameters. Every civilization eventually developed similar tactical doctrines because the mathematics of warfare were universal. He packed his standard observation equipment, including redundant recording systems, to ensure comprehensive documentation. The Galactic Military Observatory Corps prided itself on thorough analysis. Vextel had no intention of allowing his reputation for precision to suffer because of what appeared to be a routine assignment observing a primitive species. Little did he know that within days, he would be documenting combat operations that would challenge every assumption he had ever made about warfare, tactics, and the nature of military conflict itself. The Indomitable groaned and creaked as it cut through space toward the asteroid, Mining station. Vextel gripped the nearest support beam with all four hands, his blue skin turning a pale shade of concern as the ship vibrated like an ancient ground vehicle hitting potholes. "Is this normal?" he asked, watching a loose panel rattle against the bulkhead. His species had developed faster than light travel over 3,000 years ago, and their ships moved through space as smoothly as silk through water. Private Kim. Taeyang looked up from where he was cleaning his rifle. "Oh yeah, she always does this when we're getting close to action." The old girl gets excited. Vextal's translator struggled with the concept of a spacecraft having emotions. But before he could ask for clarification, Captain Li Wujin entered the troop compartment. The human commander moved with easy confidence despite the ship's violent shaking, checking on his Marines with the casual attention of someone inspecting household appliances. "First time on a human bucket of bolts?" Li asked, noticing Vextal's obvious discomfort. The Zentoran officer tried to maintain his professional composure. "I have observed pre-combat preparations among 63 different species across the galaxy. Your vessel seems—" He paused, searching for diplomatic language inadequate for military operations. Lee's laughter filled the compartment, sound that somehow made the rattling ship seem less threatening. "She's held together with spite and good intentions, but she'll get us there." He raised his voice to address the entire squad. "Listen up, Marines. Intel says Sierra 7 has approximately 200 hegemony defenders using standard energy barriers and pulse weapons. We're going in with kinetic rounds and pure stubbornness." Vextal's advanced translator immediately began processing the tactical information. 200 defenders with energy weapons against fewer than 30 humans carrying primitive projectile weapons. The math was simple and devastating. "Captain," he began carefully, "according to galactic military doctrine, these odds suggest immediate withdrawal or negotiated surrender would be the appropriate response." Private Kim Taejung looked up from his weapon maintenance with a grin that showed too many teeth. "Sounds like a fair fight to me. Fair fight." Vextal's confusion was genuine. His four eyes blinked in sequence as he processed this response. "You appear to be at a significant tactical disadvantage." Sergeant Park Manesio, a stocky woman with scars across her knuckles, grinned in a way that made Vextal's skin crawl. "Observer, you're about to learn something important about humans. We don't like fair fights." "But surely you understand basic mathematical principles," Vextal protested. "Your enemy possesses superior numbers, better defensive positions, and more advanced weapons technology," said Lance Corporal Yoon Dong-hook, checking the magazine in his sidearm. "Sounds like they're in trouble." The human Marines around the compartment chuckled at this comment. But Vextal couldn't understand what was amusing about facing certain death. In his experience, rational species recognized when they were outmatched and responded accordingly. The Indomitable shuddered more violently as they approached the asteroid. Through the small portholes, Vextal could see Sierra 7 growing larger. Massive rocky formation bristling with defensive weapons and energy shields that glowed like deadly aurora. 2 minutes to drop zone, announced the pilot over the ship's communication system. "Hope everybody's got their affairs in order because this is going to be interesting." The Marines began their final equipment checks with the methodical efficiency that Vextal had observed in dozens of other species. But there was something different about human preparations. Where other species approached combat with solemn dignity or cold professionalism, these humans seemed almost eager. Private Song Hoen was humming while adjusting her armor straps. Corporal Choi Jae-wook was telling jokes that made his squad mates laugh despite the approaching danger. Even Captain Lee maintained an air of casual confidence that defied the tactical reality they faced. 30 seconds. The pilot called out. The ship's rear doors began opening with a mechanical whine, revealing the star-filled void beyond. Vextal's translator struggled to process the rapid-fire human chatter as the Marines prepared for what they called a combat drop, apparently launching themselves directly from the ship toward the enemy installation. "This is suicide," Vextal muttered, checking his own safety harnesses. "Nah," said Private Kim, securing his helmet. "Suicide would be if we tried this without backup plans." "You have backup plans?" "Sure," Kim replied cheerfully. Plan B is to make it up as we go along. The assault began in a way that violated every principle of galactic military science. Instead of establishing secure perimeter positions, conducting systematic bombardment to weaken defenses, or waiting for optimal tactical conditions, the humans simply launched themselves directly at the heavily fortified asteroid base. Vextal watched through his recording equipment as 30 human Marines, protected by nothing more than metal armor and sheer determination, flew through space toward an installation defended by energy weapons that could vaporize small spacecraft. The hegemony defenders responded exactly as galactic military doctrine predicted. Energy barriers activated, creating glowing shields around critical installations. Automated defense systems came online, filling space with deadly plasma bursts. 200 enemy soldiers took defensive positions with weapons that could punch through starship hulls. What happened next defied every military principle Vextal had ever studied. Private Song-Hoon's armor took 3 direct hits from energy weapons that should have liquefied her internal organs and vaporized her skeletal structure. The plasma bursts left glowing craters in her chest plate and sent her spinning through space like a broken toy, instead of dying as any rational being should have. Song used her damaged chest plate as an improvised shield, angling the destroyed armor to deflect additional incoming fire while she continued advancing toward the enemy position. Her rifle, which Vextal could clearly see, was held together with metallic tape and what appeared to be hardened adhesive, continued firing with mechanical precision. Song's down to backup systems, reported Corporal Choi Jae-wook over the communication channel, his voice carrying the same tone someone might use to mention a minor technical difficulty. "I'm fine," Song replied, her voice strained but determined. "Just a little crispy around the edges." Vextal's 4 eyes tracked multiple combat scenarios simultaneously, and what he observed challenged everything he thought he knew about warfare. When Lance Corporal Yoon Dong-hyuk's rifle suffered a critical malfunction during intense enemy fire, he didn't retreat to cover for repairs or call for equipment replacement. Instead, Yoon used his broken weapon as a club, swinging the heavy rifle like a primitive melee weapon while drawing a secondary sidearm with his free hand. He continued his assault without missing a beat, as if catastrophic equipment failure was simply another tactical consideration rather than a mission-ending disaster. The hegemony defenders, who had fought dozens of species across the galaxy, found themselves facing opponents who operated outside every known military parameter. Rational beings retreated when injured. Logical combatants withdrew when their equipment failed. Intelligent species recognized when they were outmatched and responded with appropriate caution. Humans apparently ignored all of these basic survival principles. Private Kim Taeyong's helmet cracked during his combat drop, exposing him to the vacuum of space. Instead of falling back to receive medical attention, he sealed the crack with emergency repair foam and continued fighting while breathing recycled air from his damaged life support system. "Kim, your atmospheric integrity is compromised," Captain Lee called over the radio. "I've got maybe 20 minutes of air left," Kim replied, his voice muffled by the improvised repairs. "It's more than enough time to finish this party." By the time the asteroid's defensive systems finally fell silent, Sierra 7 had been completely overrun in less than 4 hours. According to galactic military projections, a properly defended installation of that size should have withstood siege conditions for several days. Even against superior attacking forces, the human Marines had accomplished in hours what should have taken weeks, using equipment that looked like it belonged in a museum and tactics that violated every established principle of military science. As medical personnel treated the wounded, Vextal approached Captain Lee, who was calmly field-stripping his weapon despite a plasma burn across his left shoulder that would have hospitalized most species for weeks. 3 days had passed since the Sierra 7 assault, and Vextal was beginning to think he had humans figured out. They were reckless, sure, and they improvised constantly instead of following proper military protocols. Their equipment looked like it belonged in a scrap heap, and they treated catastrophic failures like minor inconveniences. But their methods seemed to work, even if they violated every principle of galactic warfare he'd ever studied. Then the emergency alert came through on the Indomitable's communication system. Vextall was in the ship's observation deck, reviewing his combat footage from Sierra 7, when Captain Lee burst through the doors with an expression that made the alien observer's blue skin turn cold. The human commander's jaw was set in a way that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. "What's the situation?" asked Corporal Choi Jae-wook, looking up from where he was teaching Private Kim. "Taeyong, some kind of human card game involving small pieces of colored plastic. Sergeant Park and 5 Marines got grabbed during that recon mission to Omega Station," Lee said grimly. "Intelligence reports they're being held in the station's detention block. Heavily guarded, no chance of natural rescue. Vextall S4. Eyes blinked in confusion. "Captain, I'm not familiar with this term natural rescue. Could you clarify?" "He means they're stuck," explained Private Song Ha-yoon, who was cleaning her rifle with the same care most species reserve for religious artifacts. "Omega Station has over 800 hegemony soldiers, automated defense systems, and enough firepower to crack a moon." The alien observer felt relief wash over him. Finally, humans would demonstrate rational behavior. Standard galactic protocol was clear on situations like this. Captured personnel during reconnaissance missions were classified as acceptable losses. Military assets were never risked for individual recovery operations, especially when the enemy held an overwhelmingly superior position. Vextall expected Captain Lee to file the appropriate casualty reports, hold a brief memorial service, and move on to the next objective. This was how civilized species handled unavoidable losses during military operations. Instead, Lee was spreading tactical maps across the briefing table and calling up detailed schematics of Omega Station on the holographic display. "We're going in after them," Lee announced with the casual tone someone might use to discuss dinner plans. The silence that followed was broken only by the Indomitable's engines humming in the background. Vextall's translator worked overtime trying to process what he thought he'd heard. "Captain," he began carefully, "your tactical analysis must be flawed. You're proposing to risk an entire military unit to recover 6 individuals from what you yourself described as an impregnable position. This violates every principle of military efficiency known to galactic civilization." Lee looked up from the tactical display, and Vextall saw something in the human's eyes that made him deeply uncomfortable. It wasn't madness exactly, but it was something outside his experience with rational military thinking. "Observer," Lee said, checking his sidearm with steady hands, "you're about to learn something important about humans. Don't leave our people behind, ever. But the mathematical impossibility, math doesn't account for human stubbornness," interrupted Lance Corporal Yoon Dong-hyuk, who was already strapping on his combat armor. "Besides, Park still owes me 20 credits from our last poker game. I'm not letting her get out of paying up that easy." Vextall watched in growing horror as the humans began preparing for what could only be described as an elaborate suicide mission. Omega Station was a massive orbital platform, bristling with weapons systems and defended by nearly 1,000 enemy soldiers. The tactical computers built into his observation equipment ran probability calculations that came back with success. Rates so low, they registered as statistical impossibilities. "Perhaps we could negotiate for their release," Vextall suggested desperately. "The hegemony often accepts prisoner exchanges or territorial concessions." Private Kim Tae-young laughed while loading magazines with ammunition. "JRD's observer, you still don't get it. Don't negotiate with people who grab our friends. We go get them back." The rescue mission began in a way that Vextall could only describe as controlled insanity mixed with engineering improvisation. Private Kim volunteered to approach Omega Station's main docking bay in a shuttle that was already damaged from there. Previous mission, deliberately drawing defensive fire, while the rest of the unit prepared to infiltrate through what humans optimistically called alternative entry points. Vextall soon learned that alternative entry points was human military slang for blowholes in the enemy's walls and climb through the wreckage. "Kim, your shuttle is falling apart," reported Corporal Choi over the communication system as the young Marine's craft began taking hits from the station's automated defense grid. Vextall watched through the Indomitable's sensors as energy blasts tore chunks off the small vessel's hull. "Still flying, still drawing fire," Kim replied cheerfully, his voice crackling through radio static as his communication systems failed. "Just point me at something Vextel's recording equipment captured everything as the human pilot deliberately crashed his damaged shuttle directly into Omega Station's primary power relay, creating a massive explosion that knocked out half the station's electrical systems. Kim had sacrificed his escape route and possibly his life to give his teammates a tactical advantage. Kim's life signs are stable, reported the ship's medical scanner. His emergency beacon is active inside the wreckage. Good, said Captain Lee, as if pilots surviving deliberate crash landings was a routine occurrence. That gives us another person to rescue. While Kim's dramatic entrance distracted the station's defenders, Lance Corporal Yoon and Private Song were engaging in what they called aggressive demolition. Vextel watched through security cameras as the two humans systematically destroyed sections of Omega Station's infrastructure, creating diversions and opening new routes for the main rescue team. Observer Song reported over the communication channel while hanging upside down inside a ventilation shaft. Humans have a saying, if it's stupid but it works, it's not stupid. Vextel studied the tactical display showing Song's position. She was suspended in a maintenance tunnel barely wide enough for her shoulders, surrounded by electrical conduits that could electrocute her if touched, with no apparent way to advance or retreat. Your current position appears both stupid and non-functional, he replied, his translator struggling to process human idioms and military slang. Give me 30 seconds, Song said, with the confidence of someone discussing routine maintenance rather than potentially lethal demolition work. True to her word, Song detonated an improvised explosive device that she had somehow constructed. From spare equipment parts and cleaning supplies, the explosion opened a direct route to the detention level, while simultaneously destroying the backup power systems for that section of the station. What Vextel witnessed next would disturb his sleep cycles for years to come, the rescue team found. Sergeant Park and the other captured Marines in a heavily guarded detention block. The prisoners were held in individual cells surrounded by 60 hegemony soldiers and protected by overlapping energy barriers that should have made extraction impossible without heavy siege equipment. The human solution was characteristically insane. They used themselves as living shields. Corporal Choi positioned himself directly in front of the detention cells, his armor taking energy blasts that were meant for the prisoners while Private Song provided covering fire from an angle that defied basic geometry. Vextel watched his tactical displays trying to understand how Song could be shooting at enemy positions while apparently occupying the same physical space as a solid wall. Lance Corporal Yoon took the concept of human sacrifice to its logical extreme when he literally threw himself on top of a plasma grenade that enemy soldiers had tossed toward the rescue team. His armor absorbed an explosion that should have vaporized everything within a 10-meter radius. Yoon's armor is completely fried, reported the squad medic, checking her instruments while ducking behind whatever cover she could find. But somehow, he's still mobile. I'm fine, Yoon gasped, his voice barely audible through communication systems that had been melted by the explosion. Just a little toasted around the edges, against every principle of tactical logic, physics, and common sense. The rescue succeeded. All 12 humans made it back to the Indomitable alive, though several would require medical treatment that would keep them hospitalized for weeks by galactic standards. As the damaged ship limped away from Omega Station, leaving behind a trail of debris and very confused hegemony defenders. Vextel found Captain Lee in the medical bay receiving treatment for plasma burns that covered most of his left side. 2 weeks had passed since the impossible rescue at Omega Station, and Vextel was starting to think he understood how human minds worked. They cared more about individual soldiers than military strategy. They made up solutions on the spot instead of following proper procedures. And they somehow maintained fighting spirit through what looked like organized chaos mixed with dark humor. But then the hegemony commanders made what would prove to be their biggest mistake of the entire war. They decided to break human morale using psychological warfare. Vextel was in the Indomitable's communication center when the first enemy broadcast came through. The message was professionally produced, with clear audio and high-quality visual displays showing human casualties from recent battles. A calm hegemony officer explained in perfect standard galactic how futile human resistance was against their superior technology and overwhelming numbers. "Attention human forces," the broadcast began. "Your primitive weapons and outdated tactics cannot prevail against the might of the hegemony. Your casualties mount daily while our forces remain largely intact. We offer honorable surrender terms that will allow your surviving personnel to withdraw with dignity." By galactic military standards, it was a textbook psychological warfare campaign. The enemy was offering humans a face-saving way out of an unwinnable conflict, while emphasizing their technological superiority and strategic advantages. Most rational species would have opened surrender negotiations within hours. Instead, Captain Lee and his Marines gathered around the communication console and started laughing. Not the bitter laughter of desperate people, or the nervous chuckling of soldiers, trying to hide their fear. This was genuine amusement, the kind of laughter that came from hearing something genuinely funny. "Oh man," said Private Kim Taeyang, wiping tears from his eyes. "They think they can scare us with casualty reports and surrender offers. Should we tell them about that time Jenkins held off an entire battalion with a broken rifle and a really bad attitude?" asked Corporal Choi Jae-wook. "Nah," replied Sergeant Park Minesko with a grin that made Vextel's skin crawl. "Let's show them instead." Vextel's four eyes blinked in confusion as he tried to process this response. "Captain Lee, the enemy has just demonstrated clear strategic superiority and offered reasonable surrender terms. Why are your troops treating this as entertainment?" Lee looked at the alien observer with the expression of someone trying to explain a simple concept to a particularly slow student. "Observer, you're about to witness something that makes other species very uncomfortable. When humans are faced with overwhelming odds and psychological pressure, we don't break down and give up. We get creative." The first sign that something was seriously wrong with human military psychology came the next morning when Private Kim volunteered for what he called a special reconnaissance mission. This involved walking directly toward enemy positions in broad daylight, carrying only his sidearm and what the other Marines described as a really bad attitude. "This is tactical suicide," Vextel protested as he watched Kim stroll across open ground toward the hegemony defensive perimeter like he was going for a casual walk in a park. "He'll be captured or killed within minutes." "Maybe," Park replied, watching through binoculars with obvious entertainment. "Or maybe the enemy is about to learn why humans have a galaxy-wide reputation for being completely unpredictable." It happened next violated every principle of military psychology that Vextel had studied during his decades of observation duty. Kim approached the hegemony defensive line, chose a spot with clear visibility from multiple enemy positions, sat down, cross-legged on a convenient rock, and calmly began eating his field rations. When confused, hegemony soldiers shouted questions at him through loudspeakers, he waved cheerfully and offered to share his meal with anyone who was hungry. "Is he attempting to negotiate surrender?" Vextel asked, his translator struggling to process the surreal situation unfolding before his sensors. "Nope," Park said, still grinning. "He's proving a point about human psychology." The point became clear over the next several hours as Kim continued his impromptu picnic in full view of increasingly agitated enemy forces. Hegemony commanders, completely unprepared for opponents who treated overwhelming tactical disadvantages as minor inconveniences, began diverting troops and resources to deal with what their reports described as a psychological anomaly. While dozens of enemy soldiers focused on the single human having lunch in their front yard, Corporal Choi and Private Song slipped past the distracted defenders and began what they called aggressive intelligence gathering, which involved photographing enemy positions, counting weapons, and leaving small explosive charges in strategically important locations. But Kim's daylight picnic was just the beginning of what would become the most psychologically devastating military campaign Vextel had ever witnessed over the following days. The humans employed tactics that seemed specifically designed to drive their opponents to the edge of mental breakdown. Lance Corporal Yoon began approaching enemy positions at night, not to launch attacks or gather intelligence, but to leave small gifts. Vextel watched through his recording equipment as Yoon carefully placed packages outside hegemony guard posts. The packages contained human food items, handwritten notes and badly translated hegemony script. and sometimes just crayon drawings of smiling faces with messages like, "I hope you're having a good day and stay safe out there." "What is your strategic objective with these nocturnal gift deliveries?" Vextal demanded, after observing this pattern for several cycles. "Making them think too hard," Park explained while cleaning her rifle. "Most species fight wars according to predictable patterns: attack, defend, retreat, advance, negotiate. Humans, we're unpredictable enough that our enemies start second-guessing everything they think they know about conflict." The psychological warfare campaign reached its bizarre climax when Captain Lee implemented what he called Operation Friendly Neighbor. Instead of launching conventional military assaults, human forces began broadcasting music over open communication channels, sharing cooking recipes during what should have been tactical briefings, and occasionally calling enemy command posts to ask for directions to various local landmarks. "This is not military strategy," Vextal protested after listening to Private Song give a detailed explanation of her grandmother's kimchi recipe to confused hegemony communication officers. "This is elaborate performance art disguised as warfare." "Same thing, from a certain point of view," Lee replied, reviewing reports that enemy forces were showing signs of severe psychological stress. "Observer, we're not trying to defeat the hegemony through superior firepower or tactical brilliance. We're trying to defeat them by making them so confused and demoralized that they start making critical tactical errors." The strategy worked, with terrifying effectiveness that defied every principle of military psychology known to galactic civilization. Hegemony forces, accustomed to rational opponents who followed predictable military doctrine, found themselves completely unable to anticipate or counter human actions. Enemy commanders wasted enormous resources preparing for conventional assaults that never materialized, while their troops became increasingly paranoid about facing opponents who seemed to treat warfare as a combination of military operation, an elaborate social experiment. The psychological breaking point came during what should have been a routine patrol encounter. Private Song, while conducting reconnaissance near enemy lines, encountered a hegemony soldier who had become separated from his unit and was clearly lost. Instead of capturing him for interrogation or engaging in combat, Song approached the confused enemy trooper and offered him directions back to his own lines. She also provided a basic field medical kit for a minor injury he'd sustained, along with her personal food rations and a hand-drawn map showing the safest route back to hegemony positions. "Why are you helping me?" the bewildered enemy soldier asked in broken standard galactic, clearly expecting some kind of trap or trick. "'Cause you look hungry and lost," Song replied in equally broken hegemony dialect. "My mother taught me to be polite to strangers, even during wartime." The entire interaction was recorded by both human and hegemony surveillance equipment and spread through enemy communication networks within hours. Hegemony forces began filing reports that humans were either operating according to psychological warfare principles to advance for conventional military analysis, or they were completely insane and therefore unpredictable in ways that made effective tactical planning impossible. 6 months had passed since Commander Vextal first stepped aboard the rickety human transport ship Indomitable, and now he sat alone in his quarters, staring at the most troubling military report he had ever written. The document glowed on his datapad, filled with observations that would shake the foundations of galactic military science outside his small window. Stars drifted past as the ship traveled through hyperspace, but they looked different now. Looked different after what he had witnessed. The war was over. 3 weeks ago, the mighty hegemony forces had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had retreated from a technologically inferior opponent. Their official reports cited unacceptable psychological warfare conditions and enemy forces operating outside conventional military parameters, though the hegemony commanders, who had conquered dozens of star systems using superior technology in overwhelming numbers, had been defeated by humans armed with kinetic weapons and what appeared to be organized insanity. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. Captain Li Wujin entered carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee, the bitter human beverage that Vextal had somehow learned to enjoy despite its assault on his sensitive taste receptors. "Working late again?" Li asked, settling into the rooms. Only other chair, which groaned under his weight. The human captain looked tired but satisfied, like someone who had just completed a difficult but worthwhile task. "I'm trying to write my final report," Vextel admitted, accepting the offered coffee with gratitude. "Captain, in 43 years of military observation across the galaxy, I have never struggled so much to explain what I've witnessed." Lee sipped his coffee and waited patiently. Over the months, Vextel had learned that humans were surprisingly good listeners when something important needed to be said. "I've observed 64 different species engage in military operations across 47 star systems." The alien commander began, his four eyes reflecting the datapad's glow. "I've documented plasma campaigns where entire battles were fought with elegant energy weapons, kinetic bombardments that could crack planets, orbital sieges lasting decades, biological warfare that could reshape entire ecosystems, and technological suppression campaigns that could send civilizations back to primitive conditions." He paused, manipulating the datapad with hands that trembled slightly from exhaustion and confusion. "Captain, in all my experience studying warfare across the galaxy, I have never encountered a species that fights the way humans fight." "How do we fight?" Lee asked, though his expression suggested he suspected the answer would be complicated.
Vextel
Stood and walked to the small viewport. Staring out at the hyperspace tunnel surrounding their ship, the swirling colors reminded him of the chaos he had witnessed during human combat operations. "Other species fight for logical reasons," he explained slowly. "Territory, resources, political advantage, survival. These are rational motivations that produce predictable tactical decisions. Military commanders can analyze enemy objectives, anticipate their strategies, and develop effective countermeasures." He turned back to face the human captain, his blue skin pale in the artificial lighting. "Humans fight for each other. You treat warfare not as a political tool or strategic necessity, but as a personal obligation to the individuals serving beside you. This creates tactical unpredictability that renders conventional military analysis completely useless." Lee considered this observation while staring into his coffee cup. "Is that good or bad from a galactic perspective?" "Terrifying," Vextel replied with complete honesty. "When Private Song Ho-In gave medical supplies to that lost enemy soldier, she wasn't following any military doctrine known to galactic civilization. When Lance Corporal Yoon Dong-hyuk threw himself on a plasma grenade to protect his squad mates, he violated every survival instinct that millions of years of evolution should have programmed into his species." The alien observer returned to his datapad, scrolling through pages of tactical analysis that defied logical explanation. "Your species doesn't fight wars in any conventional sense, Captain. You fight for the concept that individual lives matter, more than strategic objectives. This makes you simultaneously the most inefficient and most effective military force I have ever studied." "That sounds contradictory," Lee observed. "It is contradictory," Vextel agreed. "You're inefficient because you take casualties and risks that other species would consider completely unacceptable. A rational military force would never risk an entire unit to rescue 6 captured soldiers from an impregnable position." He looked up from his report, meeting Lee's steady gaze. "But you're also devastatingly effective because your willingness to die for each other makes you nearly impossible to defeat through conventional military means. How do you fight an enemy that treats death as a minor inconvenience compared to abandoning their comrades?" Vextel returned to his datapad, reviewing sections of analysis that had taken weeks to complete. "I'm recommending that the Galactic Military Observatory Corps classify human warfare as a completely separate category, requiring specialized study. Traditional military analysis is inadequate for understanding forces that prioritize individual loyalty over strategic efficiency." "What will you call this new category?" Lee asked with genuine curiosity. "Irrational effectiveness," Vextel replied. "Without hesitation, human military forces achieve victory conditions through methods that should not work according to established military science. Succeed anyway because enemy forces cannot develop countermeasures for tactics based on emotional logic rather than strategic thinking." The alien commander saved his report and prepared the transmission protocols that would send his conclusions to Galactic Command. He knew his analysis would be disputed by military theorists who had never observed human forces in actual combat. "Captain, I have one final question that's been troubling me for months," Vextel said. "When you risk everything to save individual soldiers, when you show kindness to enemies who should be killed or captured, when you treat warfare as a personal conflict, rather than a political necessity, do you do this consciously as a tactical choice? Or is it simply how humans naturally behave?" Lee considered the question for a long moment, rotating his coffee cup between his hands as if the ceramic container might contain answers to fundamental questions about human nature. "Observer, I think it's both," he finally said. "We choose to fight for each other because we genuinely believe that individual lives matter more than abstract strategic goals. But we're also built this way by evolution. Humans are social creatures who form emotional bonds that override logical self-interest." He looked up at Vextel with eyes that reflected years of combat experience and decisions that had saved and cost lives. "Maybe that makes us crazy by galactic standards. But it also makes us human. In my experience, being human is the most powerful weapon we have in our arsenal." As Vextel transmitted his report to Galactic Command, he included a personal note that would influence military policy throughout the galaxy for generations to come. Recommendation: never assume humans will act rationally in combat situations. Their greatest military strength is their willingness to embrace what other species would consider tactical insanity. Any force engaging human opponents should prepare for enemies who fight not for victory or strategic advantage, but for each other. This makes them more dangerous than any weapons, technology, or numerical superiority. The report concluded with a single line that would be quoted in military academies across dozens of star systems. "Humans don't win wars through superior tactics or advanced technology. They win wars by refusing to let their people fight alone." 6 months later, Vextel received reassignment to observe Crystalline Defense Force operations in the distant Andromeda sector. He found himself experiencing something he had never felt before: homesickness for an alien culture, no other species. He studied ever asked about his personal welfare, or shared their food without being asked. None of them treated a galactic military observer as anything more than a necessary bureaucratic presence, recording their activities for official reports. In his private log, accessible only to himself, Vextel wrote, "I have learned that military effectiveness cannot be measured purely in tactical terms or strategic outcomes. Sometimes the most powerful weapon a military force can possess is the simple knowledge that someone cares whether you come home alive." The comprehensive report filed by Commander Vextel became required reading at the Galactic Military Academy, and human military advisors soon found themselves in high demand across allied forces throughout the galaxy. But more importantly, report marked the beginning of galactic recognition that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology, tactics, or strategic thinking, but their fundamental refusal to treat war as anything other than a fight for the people they loved. *The end*.